I'm Mr. Tomberlin, Brent Tomberlin from South Caldwell High School. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Mr. Tomberlin. Starting out, I use a magazine in my class. It's from the North Carolina Humanities Council. And in spring of 2009, they released a magazine with Lewis Hines photographs from 1908 as part of the National Child Labor Study. So what Mr. Shelby is giving you is my lesson on urbanization, immigration, and labor. What I usually do is I start out my unit by having the students pick out at least 2 pictures from the magazine. Lewis Hines traveled through the South. He even traveled through Whitnall, North Carolina, taking pictures of child labor. So one of the first things I do is I do a little journal entry with having students identify and just reacting to at least 2 pictures in this magazine. You could get on the North Carolina Humanities Council website and they would probably send you a class set of these. But you know, since this was a big part of our community with mill workers and furniture over the past 100 years, I always like to start out with this. And we have a little 20-25 minute discussion about what do you see about child labor if you were a part of this government study, what kind of things would you pick out related to safety and so forth. What are your observations? For instance, in one of these pictures, there are kids here. One of them has a pair of shoes on, one of them are barefoot, and they're working with over 10 or 12 spindles here. So I spend a little bit of time talking about what's different in 1908 as opposed to work in 2011. And it also gives me a chance to talk about local history. I do, as part of this, I start out with 2 pictures from the Etched in Granite book that most of our libraries have about the original Shuford Mills building. One of the reasons that I do this is because my wife's parents worked in the mill for 17 to 20 years apiece. So, and that was life for a lot of people around here. So I try to connect this unit to local history. But we talk about how streams and railroads helped to helped our area to originate economically and so forth. So I spent a little bit of time building this activity by showing them several pictures from the Etched in Granite book. For you civics folks, it's a great time to remember incorporation. Granite Falls incorporated 1899, Hudson 1905. So it's a great time to connect to personal history. Several years ago in the Lenore News Topic, they actually published this picture and asked the question on the front of the news topic, who is this girl? And this was Lewis Hines' photograph from a mill in Whitnall. And so I always share this with the students just to say, hey, here we go. I also play, for another journal entry during this week of a unit, I play 16 Tons by Tennessee Ernie Ford, and we relate it to company towns. Because, just a quick drive around our county, we have some company towns. It also gets us into labor unions because although Shuford Mills wasn't a very highly unionized mill, it's a chance for us to talk about labor unions. I prepared a 3-part PowerPoint that I just haven't put up on my unit yet, but each day we take a week, and each day in that week we deal with one part of the PowerPoint. I don't know about you, but robber barons is not a stimulating subject for 16 and 17-year-olds, so it's a good time to try to cut through some of that. But each day we take a particular part of that PowerPoint that's geared to just getting them to think about different parts of immigration, labor, and how not only our community but America as a whole urbanized, because by 1900 half the people in America living in cities, half the people living on farms. By 1920 it's not true anymore. More people are living in cities. So it's a good time to try to connect some of those materials. But I always start out with the magazine, just getting them to think about what's different. And several years ago at the Levine Museum in Charlotte, they actually had Lewis Hines photographs on display. And I know Mr. Ingram, when he did this unit, he actually took the students to the Levine Museum. It's something I hope to do at some point. But if you'll notice on the sheet that I gave you, each day we try to target a particular thing. And I'll divide the classes into groups. I give them a folder when they come into class, and that's their work for the week. This is where they keep things. As you notice, I'm not going to go through every day, every step, but they have to draw their company town. This kind of keys off something that Mr. Swanson and Mr. Batten do in their civics class when they actually design a town. as part of state and local government. So I always kind of start out by saying, hey, if you had those folks as teachers, remember when they did that, we're going to kind of do something within a town. So just trying to connect to past material. And then they have to draw their company town. Because during this time, you're talking about the Pullman strike, you're talking about Homestead. And so it's a good kind of connection. And so the first day they're working on their company town, and they also have to create some characters, you know. And then ultimately this culminates through having to design a strike poster, having to kind of design a reason why workers would go on strike. And it's a great time to talk about the conditions in America. And then at the end they have to present their project. They have to either do a skit or they have to read their diary entries. But through this process, you've identified some things like a corporation, you've talked about striking workers, you've talked about racial prejudice with immigration and social Darwinism, and you've identified, hopefully, all those themes. And then at the end, when I've done this in the past, I've usually culminated this activity with a trip to the Shuford Mills building in Dudley Shoals, which is really a good time to talk about 21st century because there's a section in the mill where they're actually processing yarn to be sent to Thailand, I think. And it's also a good, I've used this in my world history class at the college to connect to globalization as well, because think about 100 years ago, there's an accident in a mill every other day. You know, if you're catching CNN every now and then, that's almost as true as some places in China where they're having mine accidents. There's a great video, it's a DVD, it's called America 1900. And I always use a piece from that DVD on the Schofield mine disaster in 1900 where immigrants from I believe it's Scotland and Wales, Finland too, come over to America. So it's a great time to talk about immigration and why folks would want to come. And there's a great personal story there about a family that basically moves the entire family to Utah, and then they go through this disaster, and the remnants of the family, which is like 2 or 3 folks, end up moving back because it's just been too difficult. So it's a good time to get into some of those themes, and it's not always you know, a positive story, but I feel like it's a good time to connect to local history, and because you'll have students through this process say, oh, that's my granddaddy, or you know, they'll have stories about, oh yeah, well, that's why my granddad only had half of a finger, you know. And when you go through the mill, you know, today it's all automated. And it's really interesting to go with students. I've been able to connect with one of the former nurses who kind of was in charge of the Shuford Mills buildings, and she took us through. She literally pulled workers off the line so they could show us their injuries. And they were, I mean, I know that sounds bad, but they were really upfront about, hey, this is what happened, and this is when it happened. And, you know, it's not 1900, folks, it's 1960 or 70s. One of the things that I also do, and you can get this off the UNC Chapel Hill Library, and it's just a page and a half, but it's a write-up, and it's a really good write-up about the Low Ray Mill strike and incidents in Gastonia. Today, of course, the Low Ray Mill building is being sold to make high-dollar condominiums, so it's also a way to talk about how people get screwed over, even in their own area. You know, the people that work there aren't going to be able to buy those condos. So once that once the mill is redone. But the Low Ray Mill strike occurred in 1929, so it's not too far from 1908. So it's a good time to connect those kind of events. And at the end, usually I have them do a final journal reflection where they just, you know, they can tell me about their family, or they can tell me what they learned from this experience. And a lot of times they'll make some historical connections about riding around our own area, the number of mill houses that have been kind of added on to or redone, you know. And so it's a good time to talk about urbanization and community remodeling today. Thank you.